Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. So of course, game week 1 has come and gone, and now it's time to look at game week 2 and kind of think about whether our assets and whether our kind of opinion on assets have changed. And a lot of the data that we got was really on championship teams and also some of the teams that have benefited from either having a lot of transfers or not benefited, such as Aston Villa. And then also looking at some teams that are kind of being run by new managers, so Spurs and Everton most notably. And once again, I'm going to be going through the full selection of players that I think are good to pick for you guys, and I'll explain to you why I might have changed some players. As you can see on this list, I have now introduced a system where new players are listed as new, and then you have distinguishing between someone who is a riser, which means that in terms of priority, I think they've increased from the previous game week, and someone who has fallen. Now, of course, because it's so early into the season, we have a lot of rises and falls, but I imagine this will kind of average out over time as we get a bit more of an understanding of players. On top of that, of course, I have to be wary of the fact that some people might be injury rotation concerns, so still stay out for that. Someone like Gundogan is an example of that. But let's start with the goalkeepers. So Sanchez, of course, is for me still an interesting goalkeeper simply because the fixtures are rather nice for now. And I don't really see any other 4.5s who clearly strike out as me as very interesting other than Raya. And you will see that Raya, of course, has been introduced back, or not introduced back, but introduced into the team. Now, Brentford, of course, had two new defenders coming into the system. But for me, they performed exceptionally well versus Arsenal. Arsenal created a lot of chances. They didn't really finish them, which is one of the questions that you'll be asking, what happens if Arsenal has a good clinical striker? Would that have changed things? And that is a fair point. I will say that when Raya had the opportunity to make a good save, he did. And, that is something that is comforting. And their ability to play out of the back is also something that's comforting. I think they handle press quite well, seemingly. But we still need to see more before we actually think, oh, Raya is the new kind of 4.5 fantastic option. I don't think there's a new Martinez as of right now. Bachmann, the same thing with kind of, talking about new teams coming back in. I think Watford, of course, were listed as the best championship defense, and we expected them to have a probably rough start regardless, because the step up is huge. And simply put, I thought Aston Villa were terrible and still managed to find 2 goals. Now, of course, one goal was a super strike, and the second goal came out of a penalty, which came late in the game. But I thought Watford became very lethargic near the end of the game, and they are a little bit sus to me in that sense where I'm not sure if the depth of that squad can really hold out for the season. Now, of course, when I say depth, Cucho Hernandez did score, a super goal when Dennis was receiving a knock, but you know what I mean in terms of the defense. Meslier is still for me stays at the position as the best 5.0. I know Schmeichel got a fantastic return, but I do think Wolves really could have scored in the second half, and they were probably unlucky to not have scored. That could also, be a feature of the fact that I think Leicester itself it is a good defensive team and they have good defensive players. And I imagine with Vestergaard coming in over Amarte probably at least in game week 2 or game week 3 latest, they will improve as a side. But I still think Leicester have very tough matchups. And then, of course, when we're talking about defensive assets above 4.0, above 4.5, might as well go take that risk and get someone like Pereira instead. So for me, Schmeichel stays there. Just the low amount of shots that he saves means usually over the course of the season, much less bonus points, much less additional points, and I think he will be hampered by that. Martinez for me is the clear first fall, and simply this is due to the fact that I think Aston Villa have changed their tactical structure. They're now trying to press a lot more, and that means that they're kind of moving away from this defensive base. Now, of course, there could be a point in the season where Dean Smith says, we have to kind of revert back to what worked last year. But right now, that doesn't seem to be the case. And if they are playing off the similar structure that they debuted versus Watford, then I don't have high hopes for Martinez being a fantastic 5.5 option. That was a bit of a criticism that I mentioned, for a lot of the teams who are building value, kind of building five-a-sides. And, Martinez just didn't seem that worth it for me this year. Lloris as well as at 5.5, and it seems like Spurs have improved as a defensive side, but ultimately they're much better value in terms of the defensive options simply, and that's it. Ederson remains the same. Now, if we move on to the defenders, a lot has changed in terms of the 4.0 players. Not around Tsimikas, who we expected to have a clean sheet, and not around Amarte, who we expected to have a clean sheet. The situation is exactly the same as I described last week. Amarte was probably going to play game week 1, probably going to get a clean sheet, and then he's probably out of the team. He had 2 kind of big mistakes versus Adama Traore, And I expect, Rodgers to have kind of backed the Vestergaard transfer. He seemed quite confident in Vestergaard's ability to start even. He came off as a sub eventually, came on as a sub eventually, sorry. And I expect him to probably start, as I mentioned, by game week 3 latest. And for me, this means our Marte drops to the bottom. You shouldn't be looking at transferring him in. And if you have him on your team, you should have a plan at least by game week 3 to think about whether you can adjust, because we now have some pretty strong 4.0 defenders. And this is fantastic for a lot of players who have Simicast and are wondering about how to get out of Simicast, because we now have the potential that Livramento and Hover as being consistent 4.0 starters. We saw Livramento actually play for Southampton. The issue with Southampton, of course, is they themselves look like a bad defense, and that obviously hampers, his clean sheet potential. But he could have attacking dividends. That is the kind of enabling factor that he has over the other 4.0 defenders if Simicast suddenly falls out of priority, right? Whereas Hover, I think, will probably be an interesting option once Wolves have less tough fixtures, because right now they're really in the thick of it. With Omobamidele, I think it's a similar situation to Hover in the sense where he probably starts for Norwich when he's fit. But there will be a kind of tricky situation where you have to deal with the impact of Norwich's terrible fixtures. So for me, as I mentioned to you guys, he's on my team simply for that reason. I just expect him to stay and maintain value, and I'm trying to kind of cut down on my bench so that I can maximize on points early in the season. And I think for now it's worked out so far. But as I mentioned, as we head to game week 3, we will talk about solutions. But the great thing right now is we now have at least 2 to 3 consistent 4.0 options, even with the Marte out. So great news for us there. In terms of 4.5, we actually have, I think, once again, another very interesting introduction of several players, because I think the priority over some teams have changed in terms of how strong their defense looks. For me, I think going into a Brentford defense now could be interesting. I still need to see more of the Brentford defense, but I was very interested in both Pinnock and Rico Henry. Pinnock because of the long throws, and Rico Henry because he plays left wing back and will probably cross a few balls into the box. Someone like Tony can definitely capitalize, and he has the stature and the frame to absolutely do so. So that's what's interesting to me about both of these players. I don't expect crazy attacking dividends, but Brentford, as I mentioned, were one of the sides with actually the least expected goals allowed last season in the championship. And that's an underlying stat that basically tells you the defensive structure of the team is solid in terms of what kind of strikes are they allowing the opponent to have, etc., etc. Now, of course, I will mention that Arsenal had very good XG versus Brentford, and you could be worried about that, but I think that's exactly what Arsenal is, right? Sometimes they're a very kind of budget version of Man City where they create a lot of chances, but it doesn't actually ultimately look like they will finish any of them. Of course, Man City are leaps and bounds above them, but you kind of get the comparison, right? So I think Brentford defense could be interesting, but I would still give one more week before I kind of decide, because Brentford still have great fixtures even after game week 2. So for me, it's more about kind of assessing a little bit more, waiting for a little bit more sample size before I go fully deep into Brentford defense and being very high into it. What I will say about the Spurs defense is now with the kind of defensive upgrades and the fact that they're seemingly allowed to spend, regardless of whether Harry Kane plays, I think they are going to be a solid defense. Tanganga was the player who most impressed me. His ability to really park out Grealish and Sterling for most points of the game versus Man City shows you how much of a defensive upgrade he is to both Doherty and Aurier. Aurier was someone who caused penalties when he kind of had his mind wavering in other kind of areas of the field last season, and then Doherty, we know, is a pretty poor defender, reason being why he, kind of thrived in a 5-back formation. I don't see Spurs moving to a 5-back formation. I don't think Nuno is not necessarily just a 5-back formation coach. He clearly is a pragmatist, and for me, Tanganga looks wonderful. Another interesting kind of thing, if you're following Tanganga, is have a look at what Spurs will kind of field out as an XI in the European Conference League, because that will probably tell you who's going to start on the actual weekend game, which is going to be more important for Spurs as of right now, because I imagine even if they field a very weak XI, the comparison point is there where, for example, you looked at Arsenal last season, they pretty much sent most of their academy players versus Europa League competition. We're now kind of in a tier below that, and they did it absolutely well for the group stages. Playoffs should be similar for Spurs, and I think that is a good test to tell who's interesting for Nuno. The Sanchez and Dyer situation is more of a wait and see, because we now know that Romero is coming into the side. Tomiyasu could also come in, and that could be kind of switching things up. So I would kind of wait and see with them. For me, Tanganga actually becomes a more impressive 4.5 option. I don't really care that Doherty can rotate with him. I think Tanganga will lock down this spot just from the eye test. Ailing, he scored a super goal. I don't think you can expect that, any more times this season, maybe once. But he didn't really come close to building any effective chances outside of that. So for me, he's just a classic kind of almost Leeds. Treat him like a centre back, really. He will kind of be able to get you those Leeds clean sheet points when they do get them, but nothing else really. I think if you didn't get him from game week 1, that's probably his most interesting kind of offensive potential, I think, realized early on in the season. So don't go overboard in terms of knee jerking him, but he remains at the same priority for me. And with Veltman, there was, if you guys were interested into why he wasn't playing last week, it was simply due to the fact that he had come in close contact with someone with COVID, and therefore was benched for that game for kind of health and safety reasons, I imagine. So I expect, is someone who will return to the side and probably benefit from the nice little fixture that Brighton have in game week 2. But I was not very high on how easily Burnley were able to kind of make a mess of Brighton through the set pieces. That's going to be a constant point of worry. If you guys are worried about Arsenal set pieces, I think have a look at some of the opportunities that Burnley created versus Brighton. They were pretty scary. So I wouldn't be too high on getting too deep into the Brighton defenders, and that kind of remains the same. With White, I've moved him into an avoid for now situation because basically in game week 1, the reason why I said he was a good choice was because he might be able to get that clean sheet versus Brentford, and then he could sit in your bench for a while. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but you still have the opportunity to have White past game week 4 if you wouldn't be looking to get White in, and simply that's why he's in that kind of avoid for now category. If we move on to the 5.0 defenders, we now are looking at Soufal, who, in my opinion, still remains as a good kind of 5.0 player. I know you guys are going to be scared about the fact that, as I mentioned as well, the West Ham defense being very suspect, but when you look at some of the fixtures that they have coming ahead post Leicester, they're going to be playing versus Crystal Palace and Southampton. These sides both look a bit fruitless right now in terms of attack, and that is going to be a huge benefit. If you're going for someone like Soufal, who also has strong offensive kind of attacking potential. So for me, he remains that position. All the other players remain in similar positions, except for Reguilon, who comes in now. The interesting thing about Reguilon is that there simply is just a direct cheaper option in Tanganga. And whilst you guys might be saying to yourselves, Reguilon is a more attacking option, Tanganga is a much more defensive option, I would simply say that, you have to kind of look at the threats that Tanganga had to deal with. I think Grealish and Sterling is a bit more of a harder task for a defender than Mahrez and Ferran Torres, in my opinion. Even though both defenders performed very capably. It's just more about how much pressure you have to soak in, and I thought Tanganga had a fantastic performance, and clearly Man City did try to attack through Grealish several times. So for me, I think Tanganga has the opportunity to actually push ahead, and if you look at, for example, the Arsenal preseason game, that's exactly what he did. He actually got the assist to Son, and there's great potential there. If we now move on to the 5.5, Shaw remains the same, Digne remains the same, other Man United defenders remain the same. The only kind of change has been I've moved Pereira and Alonso up away from differentials into a good choice category. The thing about Leicester is that they will have some tough fixtures, but I do just really like how offensive Pereira is. We saw it in the game versus Wolves, of course, and he's going to be creating those chances for someone who's so clinical like Vardy all season. The issue, of course, is going to be whether he gets those clean sheets in the upcoming week. So that's why he's not so clearly a best choice right now. But I think he could continue to move up this list as the season goes on and when the fixtures get a little bit nicer for Leicester. In terms of Alonso, he's risen, but keep in mind that this could be a bit of a kind of a gamble, right? A bit of a risk. I've seen the fact that I think Alonso is very much due for a price rise tonight. And that is a bit of a worrisome kind of point for me, because I think by game week 3, you could see Chilwell rotating again. Emerson Palmieri is seemingly out of Chelsea, and that kind of reduces the rotation risk, but we're still dealing with Chilwell right now, and there is a threat there for me. So watch out in terms of if you're someone who's looking for Alonso. I mean, you probably won't look at Alonso anyways, but I just think he can definitely hold versus Arsenal. But past that, big question mark for me. 6+ defenders, it remains the exact same situation. Cancelo is a huge attacking threat, but probably could be rotated by someone like Walker. A lot of people are going to reference the fact that Cancelo played left back last season, but remember that Zinchenko is a player that has continually improved year on year. and I think his position rather as a left back is just as set. On top of that as well, Benjamin Mendy has had seemingly very good performances at the start of the season, and I think there is a bit more opportunity that Pep could have restored faith in him. Keep in mind that Pep is a manager who is very happy to rotate players whenever he wants. Cancelo had a brilliant start to last season, and Pep had some faith in him. But then what happened near the end of the season, near the back half of the season? We saw Walker take priority. And that's, for me, my concern. I think right now Zinchenko and Walker have the full faith of Pep. So maybe I would still say that Cancelo is a bit more of a differential still. I wouldn't change my mind on that right now, although he could have a fantastic game versus Norwich. If we move on to the midfielders now, this is where I think my assessment of Brownhill is probably incorrect, and I apologize for that. I still have Brownhill in my team, and you can see my mistake flat out. But I think Gilmour and Bissouma are probably going to be those 4.5 options where they're clearly nailed for 90 minutes a game. I thought Gilmour didn't look out of place at all versus Norwich, and we know Gilmour's a great player. Probably not going to be set for kind of goals and assists, but simply 2 points over the 1 point that Brownhill might bring. Same thing for Bissouma, who could also have a beautiful long shot goal here and there. You never know. With Skip, I think he's an interesting Tottenham defender. Defensive kind of midfielder, probably a very physical kind of box-to-box midfielder. Not really too dissimilar to Bissouma, to be honest. But I think there could be opportunity for you to triple up on Spurs if we're really high on them at one point. So you don't really want to be having Skip as your 4.5 midfielder, in my opinion, at that situation. You could potentially have Son, a defender, and even Kane at one point in time if things go and the stars align, really. So that's how I feel about that. In 5.5, I've given Mbeumo the green light for a rise. I considered him a differential in game week 1, and I watched him versus Arsenal, and simply put, there's a lot of opportunities for him to attack. He made an absolute mockery of the Arsenal defense at times. He gets in behind very often, even more so than Tony, by the way. So if you're someone who's interested in getting one Brentford asset and you don't have one yet, Mbeumo could really be the one, if you're not looking at a defender right now. Very interesting out of position player. I'll be definitely kind of covering him in a hidden gem video very shortly this week. And that's why he kind of sits there. Gray, for me, I thought was interesting in the Everton game. I don't think I'm super high on him, to be honest. I think I really might rank him as a differential. Apologies for that. But simply put, I think the thing with Gray is that he's just a supportive winger in the system. I think the key assets that you ever want to get for Everton this season are going to be Calvert-Lewin, Richarlison, and Digne. I don't really see anyone else apart from that unless they get another kind of very attacking right back who can probably replace Coleman in the long term. But that's how I see things right now. Smith Rowe, very tough fixtures right now, definitely a differential. Had a great game versus Brentford regardless, but that's the situation. With Canos, he's kind of that right wing back who, as I mentioned in the tactical analysis versus Arsenal, he plays a very kind of free roaming structure in the team, and he very much often ends up in that left wing position that he played in last season. And he took 1 or 2 good shots on target versus Arsenal, one of them, of course, being a goal, as you know. But I think he might be a bit of a trap, so I wouldn't be 100% into him. I'm actually still much more into Mbeumo in the medium term and the long term, even the short term, sorry. At 6.0, nothing has really changed there. I've only kind of increased my my stock on Sarr. I think he had a fantastic game versus Watford. He was single-handedly responsible for making Matt Targett subbed out early in the game, and Sarr also, I think, gave Ashley Young a very tough task, a much more disciplined veteran defender, and still I think Sarr had great forays into the box. So for me, the way I kind of see things is that Sarr will be able to be a lethal threat versus most fullbacks this season, and the only question is whether he will have the support of some of the other West Ham players, whether they can step up and continue to finish as well as they did versus Aston Villa. Sarr, for example, if you look at his goal versus Martinez, it was a bit of a lucky goal. It was a deflection. I think obviously he has the attacking threat, but can I really say that he makes a lot more sense than Benrahma right now? Probably not. Souchet kind of rises back in the rankings. I can't deny him anymore. I don't even know why I denied him in the last rankings. Souchet is clearly a player who has a beautiful eye for how to actually attack the ball. It's almost like an offensive rebounder in basketball, someone who is well aware of what his teammates are trying to do, and he acts off of that. His runs are entirely designed to, pounce on rebounds, and then of course you have the set piece threat. And simply put, I think Soucé is very interesting as an option, but I still prefer Benrahma, and that's where I think stand for me in terms of West Ham. In 6.5, not much has changed. I brought Lucas Moura into the list. I thought he had a very, very effective game versus Spurs. One of the issues, of course, is that he might be playing a little bit deeper in the system, but he still makes a lot more sense than Dele Alli. Dele Alli has been mentioned, in my opinion, too often for players. And when you watch Dele Alli play, I don't really think he's going to be some sort of talismanic player at 6.5. You know, he's not going to be scoring a bunch of goals, making late runs in the box, and suddenly having a career-defining season and a return back into kind of being in the minds of everyone. I think Lucas Moura has more potential to have a good solid season at 6.5. You know, that is a price point where you can mess around with nice little fixtures and take a little cheeky punt on someone. And I think Lucas Moura could be it. You know, Spurs, to be honest, have great fixtures, but for me, the clear talisman is Son, and all kind of other assets in Spurs pale in comparison. So, you know, when we're looking at 6.5, I'm starting to feel that kind of range of player is not so interesting, especially with Rafinha potentially being, involved in kind of international duty by game week 4, and that could kind of preclude him from actually playing in that game week. So that 6.5 kind of slot seems to be growing a little bit worse for me. I think you could actually either budget down or budget up from that area. And you can see the contrast, by the way, in terms of the colors, right, at 6 and 7.7 to 7.5. So if we look at kind of players like Buendia, Saka, and Trossard, they've all been moved into differentials. Saka and Trossard were always differentials for me. Buendia, for me, I think it's more of a case of there's two things at hand, right? Aston Villa didn't get most of their fit players playing in the game, starting in the game, and a lot of their top transfers, still need some time to acclimate into the team. And that kind of coincides with their best fixtures. And if we can't capitalize on Buendia over the next 2 game weeks, there's no real reason to be looking at Buendia as a great option, right? You wouldn't be transferring to him right now, that's for sure. And that's why he kind of has fallen down in the rankings. When we move over to 7 to 7.5, we're talking about someone like Greenwood rising. And the reason why I said that Greenwood was only a good choice for me last week, even though I actually really liked his ability to score, and he did score, in game week 1, was because, for example, if you watch my game week 1 deadline stream, I did actually consider at one point maybe going for Greenwood and 2.5 in the bank, just because I thought he would score for sure. And I think there's exactly the same opportunity right here with Southampton, because Southampton seemingly are much worse than last season. Still, they're probably going to be reeling from Vestergaard leaving the team. And, simply put, I think Greenwood, him playing at centre forward seems to really enable Bruno. Because he is a much more dynamic forward in terms of his ability to kind of move to the sides and actually create plays and create space for Bruno to run in behind as a shadow striker. So for me, his role as a free roaming player is very interesting. And I wonder if Ole will be more interested in keeping him, even if Cavani comes back. I think, of course, he might play a more rotational role. And he could even be playing at right wing at points in the season, right? If we move Sancho to the left, look at the kind of starting lineup that they had versus Leeds. We had Dan James coming in instead of Sancho, really. And we can kind of see them as a one-for-one transfer, in my opinion. So there could be still a space for Greenwood to play post-game week 3. I'm not sure if he stays in the centre-forward position, and that will be what you're looking at as a Greenwood asset owner. Whether he stays in centre-forward, because that probably means more goals for him. If that's not the case, then he probably will drop a little bit in value. But I think right now, game weeks 2 and 3, still very nice for Greenwood to kind of enjoy attacking threat and provide you that attacking threat. Barnes, for me, I always said it was only a good choice. Simply put, he has to be rotated. That's something what Brendan Rodgers mentioned that he had to deal with. And, Leicester, simply put, also have tough fixtures. So for me, even though Barnes really passes the eye test, he still needs to kind of build form after the injury. And, there might be a point in the season where we move back into him. But right now, I think he's only a good choice. With Jota, I think it's a similar situation where, or at least a more immediate threat, where Firmino could actually already displace him by game week 2. I think if you're actually watching the Liverpool game and you're thinking about what Jurgen Klopp would be thinking, I think Firmino completely changed Liverpool's attack. I thought Jota's goal was honestly a bit of a fluke. And you have to look at how Firmino really develops attacking build-up play and how much the other two kind of Liverpool wingers, deal with deep blocks when Firmino comes into the team. So for me, I think Jota could really be displaced by game week 2, at the latest game week 3. But of course, if he has another great performance, that he kind of did have in moments in last season, then we'll have to reconsider. But I actually think right now Firmino could displace him very soon. Gundogan, the only reason why he's fallen is due to the injury news. He gets to attack Norwich if he gets to play, but it's once again we're kind of veering into the territory of Pep roulette, because I don't know exactly what's going on with the injury situation, and we know Pep's not going to be 100% front about it. We thought Kevin De Bruyne would probably be injured long term, but look at him making a substitute appearance. Tough situation there, but that's why he's fallen. Mason Mount, for me, the more I think about Mason Mount's position in the Chelsea kind of three-back formation, is that I think ultimately he could be a consistent player just playing behind the striker, regardless of the fact that there's a deep bench there, at least until the European fixtures come in. I think with Ziyech out as well, we probably get to see Mount behind a striker for various points in the season, and you could really benefit from him. I think he's definitely a stronger threat than players like Pulisic and Havertz right now, especially with Lukaku finding his place in the team. So for me, Mount becomes an interesting option. Pepe and Zaha, you know how it is. I've moved them to avoid for now. I think Pepe would have actually fallen this week, but it's not worth it, right? Crystal Palace have a new manager. Tough performance for Chelsea. Of course, these are the European champions, a different level of team, I would say. But I think, you can't, with so many kind of changes, both in terms of players in Palace and also in manager, not really worth taking that Zaha punt. At 8 to 10, I think the only change has been including Grealish into the team. As I mentioned to you guys, Son had great attacking potential to score versus City, and that was exactly the case. With Mahrez and Havertz, I thought that would be suspect choices because of Havertz's involvement in the VRL game, and then Mahrez also potentially being defended well by Reguilon, because that was exactly what we saw last season, and I didn't really see that changing, to be honest. I think Mahrez is the type of player where if he gets to beat his defender individually, he becomes insane as a threat. But Reguilon is a very agile defender who deals with him very well, and I thought that would be tricky. Now, of course, versus Norwich, that's probably not going to be the same situation. I think left back for Norwich is probably much worse than Max Aarons, and I think there's potential for Mahrez to attack. With Grealish, I thought he still had a relatively good game. Quiet, I would say, because Tanganga started to get the better of him at points in the game. But Norwich are a different standard of team, and Man City will definitely be able to create chances versus the side. Right now, would I be super high on Grealish? Would I be super high on Havertz? Would I be super high on Mahrez? Definitely not. But they still remain as good choices for me. It just is the case that around that range, we're talking about more set and forget players and actually getting true solid choices, and that's why, for example, I've always been against the Bruno camp. But yeah, same kind of situation with Sancho, and same kind of situation with Salah, Bruno, and Mane. You know how my thoughts are on that, so I'm not going to talk too much on that, not going to waste your time. So let's move on to the forwards. The forwards is another situation where I think things will probably change within the next few game weeks, because I thought people were unimpressed by Tony's performance, but I was much more impressed about his his complete performance. The issue, of course, is that doesn't necessarily translate to FPL. Tony defending deep, Tony winning long balls, winning balls in the midfield due to Brentford playing long ball, doesn't really benefit you in an FPL way. And I can understand why you might be a little bit lower on Tony, because it seemed he played much deeper than Mbeumo at times, and he was the one actually feeding Mbeumo on. But I also saw that Tony seems to have a very strong creative game. So for me, that gave me a lot of confidence as well in him as a player. And I think as he plays for a variety of sides this season, his physicality will definitely be a huge asset. And he could be a beneficiary of some of the crosses that Brentford put in. So I think, Tony for me is a very interesting asset. And Mbeumo for me is also someone who could actually be drawing penalties versus sides. He has that kind of technical skill set for me. So I think that's interesting for Tony, and he still remains for me as the best choice. Dennis, of course, is someone who right before him at a 5.0 price is super interesting, because he had 1 goal, 1 assist versus Aston Villa. Looked very creative, looked very dynamic, and looked very direct as a player. And that's pretty much how I would kind of consider him as an asset. I thought Aston Villa had a very poor game, and noticeably, that change in structure and change in style really affected them. And I wonder if teams who play a bit more defensively will give Dennis so many opportunities to attack. So that's the worry there. I think it could be a little bit of a knee-jerk transfer for now if you're someone who is thinking about Dennis. I would hold a wait-and-see approach for 1 more week. Also see if that knock has really affected him, because he could be injured. With Rodrigo and Mope, not much has changed. Mope has risen a little bit. He did score a goal for Brighton. And to be fair, as I mentioned, the nice thing about Mopé is he has nice fixtures, and these are the games where he could get a good start to the season for you guys. And as a differential for me, I think I'm going to move him to a good choice category, because I think strikers is also about confidence. You know, once you have one goal, you can kind of get the ball rolling. And I think Mopé is a bit more of a confident striker, where there are kind of moments in form where he will score 2-3 games in a row, and then we won't see him for the remainder of the season, because that simply is just the quality of the average kind of Brighton player. And for me, I think Mopé is in that kind of form right now, so you might want to punt on him if you are really not interested in Tony, for example. With Armstrong and Pukki, I've put Armstrong back into this list because, well, he scored a goal versus Everton, but you need to watch that goal. You need to watch the goal and understand that Southampton are not going to be given or gifted such fantastic opportunities to score a goal like that. So even though Armstrong did indeed score a goal, they weren't building any chances at all. Southampton had the least highest XG after Leeds in the last weekend, and I imagine this will follow suit for a lot of the teams that they face. They have a tough fixture schedule as well. It's definitely an avoid for now. Same goes for Pukki as well, who I don't even think he really has a chance to score many goals within these weeks. So it's just an avoid for now. Now that I've kind of now that I've created this bracket, he belongs in that bracket. Antonio and Wilson remain as the best choices for me. I'm very happy that both of them scored. I'm very happy that you guys would have got Antonio last week as well. Great kind of little pick that we had. Watkins, once again, not really sure about the extent of his injury. The issue with Dean Smith is that he's not up front with his injuries right now. He last season, I wouldn't say he lied, but he was very coy about Jack Grealish's return schedule, and that's the trick with Watkins. You need to watch this injury situation, and I wouldn't be tempted to go with him, especially now that you have Ings in the team as well. With Wood, similar situation where I think there's just better options around these kind of price ranges. He remains the differential for me. Jimenez and Iheanacho. Iheanacho is a rotation option. Jimenez is very tough fixtures, and that's just where I see them. Clear avoid for now. 7.5 to kind of 8. So with DCL now, I'm sorry, 7.6 actually, because Richarlison has kind of been included in this list due to his price rise. So the thing with Richarlison for me is that Richarlison is clearly the second striker in the system. He got 1 goal, 1 assist, which of course was a better return than DCL. But look at the expected goals for DCL. DCL benefited a lot more from that game and could have, in my opinion, more opportunities to score versus other offenses. It's clear that the Everton attack right now is schemed around kind of creating crosses and other opportunities for him, and he will be able to score these opportunities and take the most out of them. With Richarlison, he will be kind of most likely attacking kind of rebounds and also kind of maybe opportunities created in open play because he has the opportunity to kind of run off a defender. But I still think Richarlison might have been a little bit too knee-jerk of a decision by most players. I keep Ings as the best choice because even though Aston Villa don't look like a great side, he clearly is someone who they're trying to feed in terms of creating goals. And if the goals will come from Aston Villa, I think for the recent future, or the near future at least, it will come through Ings. Then I think it's an opportunity where either we kind of move the needle a little bit earlier on Ings and kind of move away from Ings this game week if he really unimpresses us, and then move into either a downgrade or a side grade in terms of Bamford. But that's how I see things right now. And apologies, Bamford is not a fall, so I think Bamford remains in the same sort of situation. Martial is the one who actually is a fall here. Apologies about that. But that's how I kind of see the situation for me. Bamford and Martial, similar situations. Martial, now that I've created this category, fits in a void for now. I think he's clearly just going to be a rotation option in the future weeks ahead. And Bamford was someone who's dealing with more tougher fixtures. So that's pretty much the situation for Bamford. He has worse fixtures than DCL and Ings, and I wouldn't really touch him until, let's say, if you really want to move from Ings this weekend. With Vardy, of course, and Cavani, nothing much has changed. Cavani, as we know, returned home for kind of a bit of a leave to see his family, and he might not be fit to start game weeks 2 and 3, to be honest. You need time to kind of get over that fatigue. He's an old player as well, and they're going to be watching his situation, not kind of throwing him out there to the wolves. So I think he's more of a wait and see option. Vardy is going to be interesting because we've reached a point in Vardy's career where he's no longer creating 50 chances because he can absolutely outpace and skin most defenses. He is mostly scoring goals through his beautiful flick-ons, his own technique, and his own kind of smart positioning. And I think that has only increased over time, and Vardy still remains the differential option in that kind of sense, right? But because he's such a quality player, he's a good choice for me. With Lukaku and Kane, it's more about comparing the premiums. Simply put, Salah and Bruno have nicer fixtures right now, so I don't have like a clear strategy in my head thinking, Lukaku is must buy, Kane is must buy. Both right now well, first of all, Kane is going to be still dealing with, I think, coming back into training, dealing with fatigue, and then Lukaku has to still acclimate to a team and play some very, very tough teams. So I wouldn't be 100% into Lukaku. I mean, Lukaku is one of the better forwards in the world, but it doesn't mean that he's set and forget for every single team ever. I mean, when you look at fixtures, when you see other kind of proven players like Salah and Bruno having nice fixtures, there's no reason to immediately move into Lukaku just because he exists, and that's pretty much how I see things. That's my game week 2 update for the cheat sheet. Hope you guys really enjoyed the video. If you guys have any comments on other players, if you think I've missed a player out, feel free to comment. Apologies if I did, but I hope this kind of general advice helps, and I think let's kind of stay tuned as well. Most of you guys will be holding transfers for this week, so it's more about building our portfolio and our understanding of teams and updating that from the previous season, and also getting that kind of new asset portfolio in our heads with the championship teams. But thank you guys very much for watching the video.